Every morning, an 84-year-old woman walked through the snow with her German Shepherd, holding a sign that asked, "Have you seen my son?" Some people gave her bread and coffee, but many turned away, pretending not to see the loneliness standing right in front of them. Then one evening, a storm from Lake Superior swallowed the road, and the old woman collapsed beside the curb. Her loyal dog covered her with his own body, refusing to leave even as the snow buried them both. A retired Navy SEAL named Caleb Rourke stopped his truck when the dog stood in the headlights, silently begging him to help. But Caleb had no idea the missing son she had searched for was once his closest brother-in-arms, and that an old military box in his cabin held the letter that would reveal everything. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel. Snow came softly to Hearthpine Falls that morning, not like a storm, not yet, but like a whisper from the old northern sky. It settled on the steep roofs of wooden houses, on the iron railings outside the church, on the red awning of Quinn's Hearth Bakery, and on the dark green pines that stood beyond town like patient guardians. The windows along Main Street glowed gold through the pale blue morning. Somewhere behind the church, a bell rang 9 slow notes, each one drifting through the cold air as if time itself had put on a wool coat and decided to walk instead of run. People in Hearthpine Falls liked to say their town was bright even in winter. They had lanterns over doorways, wreaths on porch posts, little painted signs welcoming strangers, and enough cinnamon in the bakery air to make a lonely man believe in second chances for at least 5 minutes. But every morning, when the bell finished ringing, a smaller and quieter figure appeared at the far end of Main Street. Eleanor Bell was 84 years old, though there were mornings when the winter made her look older, as if the snow had been counting her years one by one. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with a narrow frame wrapped in a worn brown wool coat that had been mended at the cuffs more than once. A faded blue knitted scarf circled her neck. Her white hair was gathered into a low bun at the back of her head, neat but fragile, like a nest built by a bird that refused to leave for warmer weather. Her face was lined deeply, not with bitterness, but with waiting. There were soft hollows beneath her eyes, and her skin had the pale thinness of someone who had known too many winters indoors. Yet her eyes remained clear, blue-gray, steady, and strangely young when they lifted toward a passing face. In her gloved hands, Eleanor carried a small wooden sign. The letters were hand-painted, slightly uneven but carefully done. "Have you seen my son, Owen Bell?" At her left side walked Noble. Noble was a 7-year-old German Shepherd with a yellow and black coat, broad chest, upright ears, and eyes the color of dark honey. Age had not weakened him, but it had deepened him. His muzzle held a few gray hairs, and his movements were measured, patient, and precise. He did not tug on the leash. He did not wander. He matched Eleanor's slow steps as if he had been given a holy duty and intended to perform it without complaint. Around his neck was an old brown leather collar with a small metal tag engraved with his name. The tag clicked softly whenever he turned his head. Noble watched everything: the bakery door, the road, the alley beside the post office, the tires of passing cars, the hands of strangers. He had the calm suspicion of a dog who had learned that not every raised hand meant kindness, and not every gentle voice could be trusted. But when Eleanor's boot slipped even a little on the icy sidewalk, Noble leaned his body toward her before she could fall. "Easy now," Eleanor whispered, touching the top of his head. "I know, old boy, I know." She said that often, sometimes to the dog, sometimes to herself. Eleanor did not think of herself as begging. That was not why she came into town. She came because Owen had once promised he would return before Christmas, and enough Christmases had passed to turn a promise into a ghost. She came because some part of her still believed that a face might change, a stranger might pause, a clerk might remember a name, or a letter might have been misplaced in a drawer that someone had finally opened. Every day she walked the same route. First, the post office, then the old train station, then the church, then the bakery, then the veterans' office near the frozen harbor. Every stop held a thread of Owen. At the post office, he had mailed his first letter home after joining the service. At the train station, he had left Hearthpine Falls with a duffel bag and a grin too wide for a mother's breaking heart. At the church, he had once played his harmonica so badly during a Christmas rehearsal that Reverend Samuel Pike laughed until he had to sit down. At the harbor, he had promised Eleanor he would come back and fix the sagging porch before the next hard freeze. He had not come back, but Eleanor still walked. "Morning, Mrs. Bell." The voice came from the bakery doorway. Martha Quinn stood beneath the red awning with a paper bag in her hand. Martha was 57, round-cheeked and warm-faced, with brown hair threaded with silver and twisted into a practical bun. Flour dusted the front of her white apron, and the cold had turned her cheeks pink. She was the sort of woman who spoke loudly because ovens, timers, and stubborn customers had trained her to, but her heart was softer than the rolls she baked before sunrise. "Noble," Martha said, narrowing her eyes at the dog in mock seriousness, "I hope you're not here to inspect my bread again. Last time, you looked at that rye loaf like it had disappointed your ancestors." For the first time that morning, Eleanor smiled. Noble sat down, very straight, as if accepting the accusation with dignity. Martha laughed and held out the paper bag. "One soft roll for you, Eleanor, and one plain piece for His Royal Fur Majesty. No butter, no seasoning, I remember." "You spoil him," Eleanor said. "No, Mom. He judges me. There's a difference." Eleanor accepted the bag with both hands. "Thank you, Martha." Martha's smile softened. She looked at the sign, then at Eleanor's face. She had seen that sign for years. She had watched the paint fade and be repainted. She had watched Eleanor's shoulders bend a little more each winter. There were things Martha wanted to say, practical things, kind things, maybe even painful things. But she knew hope could be the last chair at a table, and she would not be the one to pull it away. "You come inside for a minute," Martha said. "Warm up." "Not yet. We still have the station." Martha looked at the sky. "Weather's turning. It always does." "That's not an answer. It is at my age." Martha sighed, but she did not argue. She handed Eleanor a small cup of coffee with a lid. "Then take this at least." Noble stood, shook a few flakes of snow from his coat, and gave Martha a solemn look. "Oh, don't start," Martha told him. "I know. She's stubborn. I've filed a formal complaint with Heaven." Eleanor laughed quietly, and for a moment the morning seemed kind. But kindness in Hearthpine Falls was never spread evenly. A few doors down, the bell above Halloway Antiques snapped open with an irritated jangle. Frank Halloway stepped out and pulled his dark scarf tighter around his neck. He was 62, heavy around the middle, with a square red face, thinning gray hair combed back without much success, and a mouth that seemed most comfortable when pressed into disapproval. His dark brown wool coat looked expensive but old, like everything he owned had once belonged to someone with better manners. Frank valued polished glass, old furniture, signed documents, and tourists with full wallets. He did not value sorrow standing near his storefront. "Mrs. Bell," he called, his voice sharp enough to cut the frost. "Again?" Eleanor turned slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Halloway." His eyes flicked to the sign. "You can't keep doing this in front of businesses. People come here for charm, not tragedy." Martha's expression hardened. "Frank!" He ignored her. "I'm only saying what others think." "No," Martha said. "You're saying what you think and giving cowardice a crowd." Frank's face tightened. "This town has an image." Eleanor lowered her eyes, not in defeat, but in the weary way of someone who had learned that answering cruelty often gave it a longer life. Noble, however, did not lower his eyes. He stepped half a pace ahead of Eleanor, not growling, not baring teeth, just placing himself between her and Frank with such quiet certainty that even Frank stopped speaking for a second. Eleanor touched Noble's shoulder. "Come along." She moved on. Behind her, Martha glared at Frank with the heat of an oven door. Frank muttered something about foolish old women and went back inside, closing the door harder than necessary. Eleanor kept walking, but her hand trembled around the coffee cup. She hated that the words still found their way inside, not because Frank mattered. He did not much, but because part of her feared he might be right in the one place that hurt. What if Owen had chosen not to come home? What if the waiting itself had become the thing people pitied? No. She swallowed and tightened her grip on the sign. Owen had been many things. Messy as a boy, late to church, too fond of jokes at the wrong time, reckless with shoelaces and allergic to folding laundry. But he had never been cruel. He would not abandon her without a word. Not willingly. Noble suddenly stopped. They had reached the old train station, a white wooden building with green trim, and a clock that had not kept proper time in years. Snow gathered along the platform edge, and the tracks beyond were buried beneath a pale, unbroken sheet. Usually Noble paused here, sniffed the bench where Owen had once sat with his duffel bag, then moved on. Today he did not move on. His ears lifted, his body went still. He stared toward the northern road beyond the tracks, where the pines thickened and the land rose toward the highway. "Noble?" Eleanor whispered. The dog gave a low sound deep in his throat. Not a growl, not fear, something closer to recognition. Then, very gently, he tugged Eleanor toward the platform steps. She frowned. "No, old boy, we don't go that way." Noble looked back at her. In his eyes there was a strange insistence, almost human, almost pleading. Snow collected along the black ridge of his back, but he did not shake it off. He only stared at the northern road. For one unsettling moment, Eleanor felt the world grow thin around her, as if memory and future had brushed shoulders in the cold air. Owen had left from this station. Owen had looked back once from the train steps and lifted 2 fingers in a little salute. Noble had been a young dog then, frantic on the leash, whining as the train pulled away. Eleanor had told herself it was only goodbye for a while. Now Noble stood in nearly the same place, staring not at the tracks but beyond them, as if waiting for someone who was not Owen but carried something of him. Eleanor's chest tightened. "What do you know?" she asked softly. Noble's ears twitched. Then the moment passed. A truck rumbled somewhere far away, hidden by trees. The wind shifted. The dog blinked and stepped back to her side. Eleanor stood still for another few seconds. Then she continued down the platform. But the morning no longer felt ordinary. By noon the snow had thickened. At the veterans' office, a young clerk with kind eyes but no answers checked the name Owen Bell in a database that had been checked many times before. He was polite. That made the disappointment worse. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bell," he said. "Nothing new today." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you for looking." Noble watched the clerk's hands the entire time. Outside, the wind had begun to press harder between the buildings. The sky was still pale, but not peaceful now. It had the flat look of weather, gathering its strength behind a curtain. Eleanor should have gone home. She knew that. Her knees ached. Her fingers were stiff. The coffee Martha had given her was gone. The roll in the paper bag remained untouched, except for the piece she had broken off for Noble behind the post office. But she stopped at the church anyway. Reverend Samuel Pike was not outside that afternoon, but the church door stood unlocked. Eleanor stepped into the entryway just long enough to warm her hands. The old building smelled of pine wood, candle wax, and dusted hymnals. In the sanctuary, the piano waited beneath a white cloth. Once she had taught children to sing there. Once Owen had sat in the back pew and made faces at her until she nearly lost her place in the hymn. She closed her eyes and heard his harmonica, bright and terrible, filling the church with more courage than music. Noble sat beside her, suddenly very calm. "You remember too, don't you?" she whispered. The dog leaned his shoulder against her leg. By late afternoon, Eleanor began the walk home. Hearthpine Falls glowed behind her as shops lit their windows one by one. Lanterns warmed the snow in gold patches. Families moved behind glass. Someone laughed inside the diner. A child in a red hat pressed both hands to a window and waved at Noble. Eleanor waved back. She did not feel angry at the warmth she passed but did not enter. She had learned long ago that other people's happiness did not steal from her. Still, there were moments when seeing families together felt like pressing a bruise. Her house waited near the edge of town, where the road narrowed and the pines leaned close. It was a small white house with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and one front window that glowed weakly when the old lamp inside decided to cooperate. Snow had piled along the fence. The gate creaked when she opened it. Noble went first, checked the porch, then waited for her at the door. Inside, the house was clean but tired. The floorboards complained under her boots. The curtains had been washed so many times they had lost their pattern. The old stove clicked and coughed before giving a little heat. Eleanor removed her gloves slowly, flexing fingers that no longer obeyed quickly. "Home," she said. The word sounded brave and lonely at the same time. She fed Noble before herself, as always. He ate from a metal bowl near the kitchen stove, pausing once to look at her, as if making sure she was also eating. She broke the roll Martha had given her and dipped it in weak tea. "Don't look at me like that," she told him. "I'm eating." Noble's expression suggested he was unconvinced. "Oh, you and Martha both," Eleanor muttered. After supper, she went to Owen's room. She did this every night. The room was small, neat, and preserved with a tenderness that might have looked foolish to someone who had never waited. The bed was made with a blue quilt. A dark jacket hung behind the door. On the desk lay a few old photographs, a pocket knife, and Owen's harmonica. Eleanor dusted the desk, though there was hardly any dust. Then she touched the harmonica with one finger. "I went to the station today," she said quietly. Noble acted strange. The house answered with the soft ticking of the wall clock. She sat on the edge of the bed, not long, because if she stayed too long the room became less like a room and more like a well. She had learned to visit grief, not move back into it. At the doorway, Noble lowered himself to the floor. He always slept there, not in the kitchen, not beside Eleanor's bed. At Owen's door, the night deepened. Outside, the wind began to rise from the direction of Lake Superior. It moved first through the pines, then around the corners of the house, then beneath the porch where loose boards gave small, tired groans. Snow tapped against the window. The forecast had called for a quiet night, but the North had never cared much for human predictions. Eleanor banked the stove, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and turned down the lamp. "Noble," she whispered, "sleep." But Noble did not sleep. He lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the northern road. For a long while he listened to something Eleanor could not hear. Then he gave one soft, low whine. It was not fear. It was not hunger. It was the sound of a dog who had spent years guarding a promise, and had suddenly felt that promise stir somewhere beyond the snow. Eleanor opened her eyes in the dark. "What is it, boy?" Noble rose and stood at Owen's doorway, staring toward the unseen road outside town. The wind struck the house harder. Eleanor pulled the shawl closer, unaware that the winter had already begun shifting pieces on the board of her life. She only knew that Noble would not look away, and somewhere beyond Hearthpine Falls, under a sky filling with snow, the last keeper of Owen Bell's truth was drawing closer. By late afternoon, Hearthpine Falls had lost its brightness. The town that had glittered in the morning like a snow globe now seemed to shrink beneath the weight of the sky. Clouds rolled in from Lake Superior, low and heavy, their bellies dark as wet slate. The wind moved first along the rooftops, then through the alleys, then down Main Street with a sharpness that made shop signs swing and window glass tremble. At the far edge of town, in a weathered cabin tucked between pine trees and a frozen service road, Caleb Rourke stood under the open hood of his old dark blue pickup truck. Caleb was 50 years old, a former Navy SEAL, 6 feet 1 inch tall, with broad shoulders and a solid, disciplined build that belonged to a man who still trained even though no one ordered him to. He had the kind of strength that did not shout. His body looked like that of an office man who kept a strict routine before sunrise, controlled, lean, and steady rather than showy. His face was handsome in a rugged American way, angular, clean-shaven, with a strong chin, a straight nose, and deep-set eyes that carried a quiet sadness. His hair was a neat undercut, dark at the crown but touched with silver at the temples. He kept himself clean and orderly, as if discipline were the last bridge between who he had been and who he was now. He wore a fitted long-sleeve green camouflage uniform, proper and clean, with matching pants and brown military boots. In Hearthpine Falls, some people thought it strange that he still dressed that way. Others said it was simply Caleb being Caleb. No one said much to his face. Caleb preferred it that way. His cabin was simple but well kept. A small American flag hung near the porch, faded by years of weather. Beside the cabin stood a narrow workshop, filled with tools, spare belts, old engine parts, rolls of wire, and a radio that hissed more than it spoke. Caleb fixed generators, snowblowers, boat motors, and anything else that refused to work when winter made life cruel. He had just finished checking the truck battery when the emergency weather tone cracked through the radio inside the workshop. Caleb froze. Static buzzed, then a woman's voice came through. All residents of Hearthpine Falls in northern Copper County are advised to remain indoors. Lake effect snow bands have shifted south faster than expected. Visibility may drop suddenly. Roads near the harbor, Bridge Road, and North Service Route are considered hazardous. The voice belonged to Deputy Clara Voss. Clara was 39, a local deputy with dark brown hair usually tied in a low ponytail beneath her winter cap. She had a strong, alert face, pale skin reddened easily by cold, and eyes that missed very little. People sometimes mistook her calm for softness, until trouble came. Then they learned she had a spine made of fence wire and a heart that made her check on old widowers twice during every storm. Caleb reached for the radio. "Rourke here," he said. A breath of static answered before Clara replied. "Caleb, you on the north side? Near it, power's out at the Alder place. Elderly couple. Generator failed. I know the house. I figured you would." There was something in her voice Caleb recognized, concern wearing a uniform. "Road's getting bad," Clara added. "If you go, don't linger." Caleb looked toward the sky. The pines beyond his cabin bent under the rising wind. "I'll be quick." That's what every stubborn man says before I have to fill out paperwork. His mouth almost curved. Almost. "I'll save you the ink." He shut the hood, grabbed his tool bag, and climbed into the truck. The drive to the Alder place took longer than it should have. Snow thickened in slanted sheets, sweeping across the headlights. Caleb kept both hands steady on the wheel. He drove without panic, without hurry, reading the road the way he had once read terrain. Ice at the turn, drift forming near the ditch, visibility fading past the ridge. At the Alder farmhouse, He found Walter Alder waiting with a flashlight at the door, his thin body swallowed by a plaid coat. His wife, June, sat inside beneath 2 quilts, smiling apologetically as if the generator had failed out of poor manners. Caleb said little. He replaced a cracked fuel line, cleared ice from the intake, and restarted the machine. Warmth began pushing back into the house. June insisted he take a jar of soup. "No, Mom. You fix a woman's heat in a snowstorm. You take soup." Walter nodded solemnly. "She wins most wars in this house." Caleb accepted the jar. It was easier than arguing with a woman who reminded him of every grandmother in America and at least 3 commanding officers. By the time he returned to the truck, the storm had turned mean. The road was no longer a road so much as a pale suggestion. Caleb radioed Clara to confirm the Alders had power again, then started back toward town. He should have gone directly home. Instead, as he reached the lower bend near the old bridge road, he slowed. Something felt wrong. Not dramatic, not mystical, just wrong in the quiet way that had kept him alive in places where hesitation could end a life. The wind struck the truck broadside. Snow spun across the windshield. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Ahead, near the edge of the sidewalk where the bridge road met the last row of town buildings, something dark moved against the white. He tapped the brake. For a moment he thought it was a fallen trash bag or a deer curled against the curb. Then the shape lifted its head. A dog, yellow and black beneath the snow. The German Shepherd stood slowly, stiff with cold, and placed itself between Caleb's headlights and a smaller shape on the ground. Caleb's chest tightened. He stopped the truck. The dog did not run. It did not lunge. It did not bark wildly. It stared directly into the glare of the headlights, ears forward, body trembling but controlled. Snow clung to its back and whiskers. Its eyes shone amber in the light, sharp and desperate, yet disciplined. Not a stray's eyes. Not a panicked animal's eyes. A working dog, Caleb thought. Then the dog turned its head once toward the figure behind it. That small movement hit Caleb harder than any bark could have. He was out of the truck before he had finished thinking. The wind grabbed him as soon as he opened the door. He pulled his collar higher and moved toward the curb. Boots grinding through the ice crust, the German Shepherd held its ground. "Easy," Caleb said, low and calm. "Easy." The dog watched his hands. Caleb respected that. He crouched slightly, palms visible. "I'm not here to hurt her." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Its body remained tight, but it did not advance. Behind the dog, an old woman lay half-curled against the base of a street lamp, one hand still wrapped around the handle of a small wooden sign. Snow had gathered along the hem of her brown coat. Her blue scarf was stiff with frost. Her face was pale, eyes barely open. Caleb moved closer. The dog shifted, blocking him. "I know," Caleb murmured. "You're doing your job." The dog stared at him for one more breath. Then slowly it stepped aside. Caleb knelt beside the woman and touched 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse, weak but there. Her breathing was shallow. Cold exposure, exhaustion, maybe shock. He did not waste time cursing the world for leaving her there. Anger could wait. Warmth could not. "Mom," he said. "Can you hear me?" Her lips moved. No sound came out. The dog lowered its head close to hers and gave a small whine. Caleb shrugged off the emergency blanket from his truck kit and wrapped it around her. Then he lifted her carefully, aware of how little she weighed. She seemed made of bones, wool, and stubbornness. The wooden sign slipped from her hand and fell face up in the snow. Caleb glanced down. "Have you seen my son, Owen Bell?" For a second the storm seemed to lose its sound. Owen. The name touched a place in Caleb's mind he had kept sealed for years. Not now, he told himself. He carried the woman to the truck and laid her across the back seat, covering her with another blanket. The dog followed to the open door but would not jump in. Instead, it braced its front paws on the floorboard and looked at the woman's face, checking her. "She's in," Caleb said. "You next." The dog did not move. Caleb exhaled through his nose. "You're not leaving her. I get it." He stepped back. The dog climbed in only after pressing its nose against the woman's gloved hand. Once inside, it wedged itself on the floorboard below her, body angled toward the door like a guard refusing retirement. Caleb retrieved the sign from the snow and placed it in the truck bed. Then he drove. The storm fought him the whole way. Wind shoved against the truck. Snow erased the road, then gave it back in broken pieces. Caleb kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The woman had not fully regained consciousness. The dog never took its eyes off her. Halfway up the service road, Caleb felt the old part of himself return, clean and terrible. Assess. Prioritize. Move. No room for panic. No room for memory. He had carried wounded men through smoke, mud, heat, and noise. But there was something different about carrying an old woman through snow. War made danger loud. Loneliness made it quiet, and quiet danger, Caleb thought, was the kind towns learned to ignore. When he reached his cabin, he parked close to the porch and moved fast. He carried the woman inside first, laid her on the old leather couch near the stone fireplace, and wrapped quilts around her. Then he opened the truck door for the dog. The German shepherd jumped down, stumbled once from stiffness, and immediately followed. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, iron tools, and cold ashes. Caleb struck a fire, fed it split pine, and coaxed the flames until orange light climbed the stone. He filled a kettle, set it on the stove, and checked the woman's breathing again. Better. Still shallow, but better. The dog stood between Caleb and the couch. Caleb looked at it. "You can keep doing that if you want, but I'm the only one here with thumbs." The dog did not look amused. Caleb found a tool and crouched near the animal, waiting. "Your coat's packed with snow. You'll freeze standing there like a statue." The dog hesitated. Then, as if granting temporary permission, it allowed Caleb to wipe the snow from its back and chest. That was when Caleb saw the collar. Old brown leather, cracked at the edges, a small metal tag. "Noble, Noble," Caleb said aloud. The dog's ears lifted. "All right, Noble. Let's keep her alive." At the sound of the name, the old woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, confusion clouded her face. Then fear entered, quick and sharp. "Noble," she whispered. The dog was at her side instantly, pressing his head against the blanket near her hand. The woman's fingers moved weakly over his ears. Tears gathered in her eyes before she seemed fully aware of where she was. "He's here," Caleb said. "He wouldn't come in until he knew you were." She turned her face toward Caleb. In the firelight, her features looked softer and more fragile, but her eyes still held a small flame of dignity. "Where am I?" "My cabin. You were down near Bridge Road. Storm caught you." She closed her eyes. Shame crossed her face, faint but unmistakable. "I tried to get home before it worsened. Storm moved fast. I should have known better. Everyone should know better. Most of us don't." That earned the smallest breath of a laugh, though it faded quickly. Caleb brought warm water first. Then a little broth from the jar June Alder had forced into his hands. He helped Eleanor sit up enough to drink. She introduced herself between careful sips. "Eleanor Bell." Caleb kept his face still. Bell. Owen Bell. The name was no longer a ghost passing in a storm. It sat in his cabin, wrapped in quilts, with a German shepherd guarding its feet. "I'm Caleb Rourke," he said. Eleanor nodded, too tired to study the way his voice had changed. "Thank you, Mr. Rourke. Caleb is fine." "Then thank you, Caleb." Noble ate only after Eleanor had taken broth. Caleb noticed that too. He softened a portion of plain food with warm water and set it near the hearth. Noble looked to Eleanor first, waiting. She gave the faintest nod. Only then did he eat. Not greedily, not like a wild animal. He ate with controlled urgency, pausing twice to glance at the woman. Caleb sat back on his heels, watching. There were dogs trained to obey. There were dogs trained to guard. Then there were dogs who loved someone so completely that duty and devotion became the same thing. As the fire grew stronger, color returned slowly to Eleanor's face. The wind pressed against the cabin windows. Outside, Hearthpine Falls disappeared behind the white roar of the storm. Inside, the old woman slept. Noble did not. He lay near the couch, head up, eyes moving from door to window to Caleb. The dog's body was tired, but his mind remained on watch. Caleb moved quietly through the room, hanging Eleanor's damp scarf near the fire, setting her boots by the hearth, placing the wooden sign carefully against the wall. He tried not to look at the name on it again, Owen Bell. It had been years since Caleb had allowed that name to stand in the open. He went to the wood box and saw it was nearly empty. The storm might hold through the night, and the old woman would need steady heat. He pulled on his gloves and crossed to the back door. "I'm getting more wood," he told Noble, though he did not know why he felt the need to report to a dog. Noble's eyes followed him. Caleb stepped into the attached shed, grabbed an armload of split logs, and returned with snow dusting his shoulders. As he pushed the door closed with his boot, he heard a faint sound from inside. Not Eleanor. A scrape. Then the soft click of metal. Caleb turned. Noble was no longer beside the couch. The German shepherd stood in the far corner of the cabin, where an old military footlocker sat beneath a canvas tarp. The footlocker was olive drab, scarred along the edges, its brass latch dark with age. Caleb had not opened it in years. He had moved it from house to house, state to state, always telling himself it was just storage. Noble lowered his nose to the seam of the lid and inhaled. Once. Twice. Then he placed one front paw on top of the footlocker. Caleb stopped moving. The armload of wood pressed against his chest, suddenly heavy. "Noble," he said quietly. The dog looked back at him. There was no confusion in those amber eyes, no curiosity, no simple animal mischief, only recognition. Caleb stared at the locked box, and the fire behind him cracked like a warning. In that corner sat the life he had buried, and somehow this old woman's dog had found the scent of a man Caleb had never stopped mourning. The fire had settled into a steady burn, but the cabin did not feel warm anymore. Caleb Rourke stood in the center of the room with an armful of split wood pressed against his chest, staring at the old military footlocker in the corner. The flames behind him painted the walls in amber light, catching the brass latch, the scarred green metal, the edges of the canvas tarp that had been dragged partly away. Noble stood beside it, one paw still resting on the lid. The German shepherd did not scratch, he did not bark, he simply held his position, ears forward, amber eyes fixed on Caleb with the grave patience of a creature who had already made his case. On the couch, Eleanor Bell stirred under the quilts. "What is he doing?" she asked, her voice thin from cold and exhaustion. Caleb lowered the wood into the box beside the hearth. He did it carefully, one piece at a time, because sudden movement felt dangerous, though he could not have said why. "Noble found something," he said. Eleanor pushed herself up slightly. The firelight trembled across her lined face. Her white hair had loosened from its bun, and a few wisps clung to her cheek. She looked very small beneath the quilts, yet her eyes sharpened when she saw where Noble stood. "Oh," she whispered. Caleb looked at her. "You recognize that?" "No, not the box." Her gaze remained on the dog. "But I recognize him." Noble turned his head toward her. Eleanor swallowed, then reached for the cup of warm tea Caleb had set on the small table. Her hands shook around it. "He only does that when he smells something that belonged to Owen." Caleb's body went still. The name did not enter the room like a word. It entered like a ghost that knew exactly where to stand. Outside, the storm battered the cabin windows. Snow hissed against the glass. The trees beyond the porch bent and groaned, but all Caleb heard was that name, Owen. He had heard it in dreams, in old radio static, in the quiet after engines shut down. He had heard it in the crack of firewood, in the first note of a badly played harmonica, in his own breath when winter nights stretched too long. But he had not heard it spoken by this woman. Not like that. Not with a mother's ownership. Caleb turned back toward the footlocker. "Owen," he repeated too softly. Eleanor's eyes lifted. "My son." The room seemed to narrow. Caleb had trained himself through half a lifetime to remain steady when the world tilted. His face did not change much. His hands did not reach for anything. But inside him, something old and sealed began to loosen. He could still see Owen Bell at 32 years old. Tall, quick-moving, broad-shouldered but lighter on his feet than anyone expected. Brown hair cut short, clean-shaven face, square jaw softened by a grin that arrived too easily. Owen had been the kind of man who could make a miserable room less miserable just by leaning against a wall and saying the wrong thing at the perfect time. He had carried a harmonica in his pocket and played it badly with full confidence. Caleb had once told him that if enemy forces ever heard it, they would surrender out of mercy. Owen had replied, "Then technically I'm a strategic asset." The memory struck so suddenly that Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Eleanor watched him. "You knew him," she said. It was not a question. Caleb turned from the box. "What did he tell you about where he was going?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around the cup. "That it was security work, that he couldn't say much. He wrote at first. Not often, but enough. He said he was eating badly, sleeping worse, and that Noble would be insulted by the quality of the company he had to keep." Noble's ears twitched at his name. Eleanor looked down at the dog with a sad fondness. "He left Noble with me before he went away. Said I needed a good man in the house, and that Noble was more reliable than most men he knew." A faint sound escaped Caleb. It might have been a laugh if it had not been so wounded. "That sounds like him," he said. Eleanor stared at him as if each small confirmation were both a gift and a blade. "You really knew him?" Caleb looked toward the fire. "Yes. How?" The question was simple. Caleb wished it had been cruel. Cruel questions were easier to defend against. "We served together." Eleanor closed her eyes. The storm seemed to push closer to the walls. For years she had lived among rumors, men at desks who spoke carefully, returned letters, changed offices, a polite voice saying records were limited, a stranger suggesting that some assignments were classified, then silence, always silence. Silence had grown around Owen until it became a second son, colder than the first, living in every chair he did not occupy. Now a man stood in front of her fire and said he had served with him. Eleanor opened her eyes again. Was he kind? The question struck Caleb harder than all the others she might have asked. He looked at her then, truly looked. Eleanor Bell was not asking whether Owen had been brave. She was not asking whether he had died a hero, though those questions waited behind her face. She was asking whether the son she raised had remained himself after leaving her. Caleb's answer came low. Yes, he was kind. Her mouth trembled. He used to carry extra socks, Caleb said, not for himself, for anybody too proud to admit their feet were freezing. He joked about everything, but he noticed everything. If someone stopped writing home, Owen noticed. If someone pretended not to be scared, Owen noticed that too. Eleanor pressed her lips together, fighting tears. He loved you, Caleb said. That broke something small and silent in her. She did not sob. She only bowed her head over the cup, and 2 tears fell into the tea. Noble left the footlocker and came to her at once. He placed his head gently on her knee. Eleanor set one hand between his ears. He waited too, she whispered. Every night for months after Owen left, he slept by the door. Then one day he moved to Owen's room. Never left it after sundown. Caleb looked at the dog. Noble did not look like an animal waiting for commands. He looked like a witness. For a while no one spoke. Then Noble lifted his head again. He walked back to the footlocker and gave a soft, low whine. Eleanor looked at Caleb. Please. The word was barely louder than the fire. Caleb did not move. There were boxes a man kept because they were useful. There were boxes he kept because he forgot about them. And there were boxes he carried from one life to another because opening them would require him to admit the past had not stayed buried out of respect. This was the third kind. The footlocker had followed Caleb from a hospital storage room to a rented apartment, then to a house he sold after too many sleepless nights, then to this cabin near Hearthpine Falls. Every place he had placed it in a corner. Every place he had told himself he would sort through it when he was ready. Ready had never come. Now an old woman was waiting. So was the dog. Caleb crossed the room. He knelt in front of the footlocker and brushed dust from the latch. His hand hovered over it, broad and steady on the outside, though beneath the skin he felt the old tremor of memory. He opened it. The smell rose first. Canvas, metal, old paper, oil. Rain that had dried years ago. The scent of storage rooms, transport crates, and things returned without the men who once owned them. Inside lay carefully folded items. Old field maps, a faded patch, a utility knife, a small notebook swollen at the edges, and photographs tucked into a plastic sleeve. Caleb lifted one picture. 4 men stood beneath a hard white sun, faces tired and amused. Caleb was younger in the photo, jaw tighter, eyes less haunted. Beside him stood Owen Bell, grinning as if the world had failed to scare him properly. Eleanor made a sound that was not a word. Caleb carried the photograph to her. She took it with both hands. For several seconds she did not breathe. Then she touched Owen's face in the picture, one finger trembling over the small, bright grin. "That's my boy," she whispered. Noble raised his nose toward the photograph and sniffed. His tail moved once, not happily, not exactly, but with recognition so deep it seemed to come from another season of life. Caleb returned to the locker. Beneath the maps was a canvas pouch with a faded tag tied to the zipper. The writing had nearly vanished, but enough remained. Bell. Caleb's stomach tightened. He did not remember packing that pouch. He remembered waking in a military hospital with bandages, headaches, missing hours, and a doctor with tired eyes telling him there had been confusion with personal effects. He remembered signing papers he could not focus on. He remembered refusing to look inside certain bags because grief had teeth then, and every zipper sounded like bone breaking. He had told himself the pouch belonged to old mission gear. He had never checked. Eleanor saw the name. Her face changed. Not from hope to grief, not yet. From waiting to knowing that the door she had knocked on for years was finally opening, and something on the other side might not let her remain the same. Caleb unzipped the pouch. Inside was a black ink pen, a small length of braided cord, a folded photograph, and a sealed envelope yellowed by time. He unfolded the photograph first. A younger Eleanor stood on the porch of her house, smiling in spring sunlight. Beside her sat Noble as a young dog, his ears too large for his head, his yellow and black coat shining. A young man's shadow stretched across the bottom edge of the picture, as if Owen had taken it himself. Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth. "I remember that day," she said. "He said Noble looked more handsome than both of us." Caleb placed the photograph beside her. Then he picked up the envelope. The handwriting struck him like a hand closing around his chest. Owen's handwriting had always leaned slightly right, impatient but clear. Caleb had seen it on supply lists, bad jokes written on ration boxes, notes taped to radios. On the front of the envelope, in words that had waded through years of snow and silence, was written, "To Mom, if I'm late coming home." Eleanor stared at it. The room became terribly still. Even the fire seemed to lower its voice. Caleb held the letter but could not make himself extend it, because once he handed it to her, he would no longer be a man who had failed in private. He would be a man failing in front of the mother of his friend. Eleanor looked from the envelope to Caleb's face. "What happened to my son?" she asked. There it was. No storm could cover it. No kindness could soften its edge. No delay would make it less true. Caleb knelt before her, not because his knees weakened, though they did, because some truths should be delivered from below, not above. "Mrs. Bell," he said, voice rough, "Owen served with me. He was my friend." Her face remained still, but her eyes filled slowly. "He talked about you all the time, about this town, about Noble, about fixing your porch and planting apple trees." A breath left her. Caleb swallowed. There was a mission, far away. It went bad. Owen helped get people out who would not have survived without him. Eleanor's hand tightened on Noble's fur. Caleb forced himself to continue. He did not come home. The words entered the cabin gently. They destroyed everything anyway. Eleanor stared at Caleb as if she had not understood, though of course she had. She had spent years building little rooms inside herself for every possible answer. This one had always been there, locked and dark. Now the door opened. "My Owen," she whispered. "I'm sorry." She shook her head once, but it was not refusal. It was the body's helpless protest against a truth the soul had already received. "No one told me," she said. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. "I thought someone had. I was told families were notified. I was injured after the mission. There were transfers, paperwork, mistakes. I should have checked. I should have found you." His voice cracked on the last word. Eleanor looked at him then. Through her grief, she saw not an official, not a messenger, but a man carrying his own sentence. Did he suffer alone? Caleb's throat tightened. No, that answer he could give fully. I was near him. He knew he was not alone. Eleanor bowed over Noble. The German shepherd climbed carefully onto the edge of the couch, not fully, just enough to press his head against her chest. His large body trembled once. Eleanor wrapped both thin arms around him and held on, as if the dog were the last warm piece of her son left in the world. Caleb remained kneeling. There were apologies inside him, hundreds of them, but none seemed large enough. Eleanor did not cry loudly. Her grief came out in broken breaths, in the way her fingers gripped Noble's fur, in the way she rocked once, very slightly, like a mother soothing a child who was no longer there. Outside, the storm raged on, throwing snow against the cabin with both hands. Inside, a different storm had finally arrived. Caleb stood slowly and set Owen's unopened letter on the small table beside Eleanor, close enough for her to take when she was ready, far enough that it did not force her. Noble did not move from her arms. The old footlocker remained open in the corner, its buried things exposed to firelight. Caleb looked at it, then at Eleanor, then at the dog who had guarded a promise longer than any human had understood. And for the first time in years, Caleb knew the worst part of winter was not the cold. It was everything love had kept frozen, because no one had been brave enough to open the door. For a long time, Eleanor Bell did not open the letter. She held it against her chest with both hands, as if paper could still carry warmth from the boy who had written it. The envelope was old and yellowed, softened at the corners by years of being carried through places it never should have traveled. Her thumbs rested over Owen's handwriting, and her eyes closed as though she were listening for him through the quiet. Outside Caleb Rourke's cabin, the storm continued to breathe against the walls. It no longer struck with the same wild fury as before, but it had not left. Snow brushed the windows in restless waves. The pines groaned beyond the porch. The fire cracked in the hearth, throwing orange light across Eleanor's face, Noble's yellow and black coat, and Caleb's still figure near the open footlocker. Caleb did not speak first. There were moments when words were only tools, and every tool in the world seemed too crude. Eleanor finally lowered the envelope to her lap. Her hand moved over Noble's head. The German shepherd sat close to her knee, his ears slightly lowered, his amber eyes shifting between her and Caleb. He had stopped watching the doors. He was watching hearts now, though no one would have said it that way aloud. "He always wrote too small," Eleanor whispered. Caleb looked at the envelope. He said paper cost less than postage if you wrote like you were hiding secrets between the lines. Eleanor gave a broken little laugh. It surprised both of them. The sound was small, cracked at the edges, but it was laughter all the same. It rose and disappeared quickly, like a candle flame startled by a draft. Caleb's jaw tightened. He remembered that too. Owen Bell had been impossible in the gentle ways men became impossible when they were loved. He hid peppermint candies in his jacket pockets and claimed they were emergency morale equipment. He gave names to vehicles, radios, bad meals, and storms. Once, during a stretch of miserable rain, he had called their transport truck Miss Daisy and apologized to it for every pothole. Caleb had thought the man ridiculous. Then, during long nights when fear crawled under everyone's skin, Caleb had realized ridiculous could be a form of courage. "Your son carried peppermints everywhere," Caleb said. Eleanor looked up. "Did he?" "All the time." Said it helped him think. Truth was, he gave most of them away. Her eyes softened. "He did that as a boy. He'd save candy from church and hand it to children who cried during service. Reverend Pike told me once Owen was either very kind or running an illegal sugar ring from the back pew. That time Caleb did smile. It was brief, but it was real. He would have called it logistics. Eleanor pressed the envelope to her lap and wiped under one eye with the back of her finger. "That sounds like my Owen." The words hung between them, tender and unbearable. Caleb sat in the wooden chair across from her. He rested his forearms on his knees. His broad shoulders curved forward, his clean-shaven face drawn tight in the firelight. The neat silver at his temples made him look older than 50 for a moment, not from age, but from the weight of names he had carried in silence. "He talked about you," Caleb said. "More than you probably know." Eleanor's lips parted slightly. "He talked about your apple pie, said it could make a man confess classified information if you used enough cinnamon." Eleanor covered her mouth. This laugh came with tears. "He always stole the crust before supper," she said. "I'd turn around and half the edge would be gone." He blamed Noble when Noble was still too short to reach the table. Noble lifted his head at the sound of his name. Eleanor looked down at him. "Yes, I know, terrible slander." Noble blinked, solemn and innocent as a saint carved from fur. For a few minutes, grief loosened enough to let memory breathe. Caleb told her about Owen's harmonica, how he played it confidently and terribly, how one night he tried to perform Silent Night, and somehow turned it into something that sounded like a train losing a wheel. Eleanor laughed through tears again, and Caleb felt each laugh strike him gently, painfully, like proof that Owen had not vanished entirely. A man lived in the stories people could still bear to tell. But memory was a warm room with a locked door at the end. Sooner or later, Caleb knew they had to reach it. Eleanor knew too. She looked at him, and the laughter faded. "Tell me the hard part," she said. Caleb drew a slow breath. He did not describe the mission in violent detail. Eleanor did not need images that would haunt her sleep. She needed truth with its face washed clean enough to hold. "It was overseas," he said. "Remote. Complicated. Owen and I were part of a small team assigned to help move several people out of danger. One of them was a young interpreter. He was barely older than a college student. Thin, nervous, brave in a way he didn't understand yet." Caleb's eyes drifted to the fire. "Things changed fast. Weather, timing, bad information. We ended up cut off longer than expected. Owen kept people calm. He joked when he should have been exhausted. He gave away the last of his dry socks. He made the interpreter laugh when everyone else had forgotten how." Eleanor held the envelope so tightly it bent slightly. Caleb saw and stopped, she noticed. "Go on." His voice lowered. "Owen helped get us out. He made a choice that saved lives." Eleanor closed her eyes. "He asked me to tell you something," Caleb said. Her hand went still. He said, "Tell my mother I tried to come home." The fire snapped loudly. Eleanor bent forward as if the words had entered her body and found an old wound waiting open. Noble rose at once. He placed his head against her knee, then pushed closer, until Eleanor's thin arms could fold around his neck. She held him, her face pressed into his fur. Caleb looked away, not because he wanted privacy for himself, but because a mother's grief felt sacred, and he was standing on holy ground with dirty boots. "I should have found you," he said. Eleanor did not answer. "I was injured after that mission. There were hospitals, transfers, paperwork. I was told families had been notified. I believed it because I needed to believe something was finished. Then I came home and I wasn't right." His hands clasped together. "I stopped opening boxes, stopped answering calls, sold a house I couldn't sleep in, moved wherever the noise in my head seemed quieter. Every year I told myself I'd go back through the records when I was stronger." He gave a humorless breath. "Turns out a man can spend years waiting to become stronger and only become better at hiding." Eleanor lifted her face from Noble's fur. Her eyes were wet, but there was no accusation in them yet. Only sorrow, measuring him carefully. "Did you forget him?" The question cut deeper because it was fair. Caleb shook his head. "No, that was the problem. I remembered him every day. I just remembered him like a wound instead of a person. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at the letter. I think, she said quietly, it is time I heard my son. Her fingers moved to the envelope flap. Caleb stood. I can step outside. No. Her voice trembled, but the word was firm. You knew him, you stay. Caleb sat back down. Noble shifted closer until his shoulder touched Eleanor's leg. She opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside had been folded twice. When she spread it open, Owen's handwriting filled the page, tight and slanted and alive. Eleanor began to read silently at first. Her eyes moved line by line. Her lips trembled around words she did not speak. Caleb watched her face change. Pain came, yes, but also something else. Recognition. Tenderness. The strange relief of finally touching the truth after years of reaching into fog. Then she read aloud. Mom, if you're reading this, it means I am late coming home. I know you hate when I make jokes about serious things, but I also know you raised me to tell the truth kindly when I can. So I'll try. Her voice broke. Caleb bowed his head. Eleanor continued. He wrote that he missed the piano at church, she whispered. He missed the way snow sounded against the kitchen window. He missed Noble sleeping across the doorway like a furry tax collector. Noble's ears lifted. He said he missed apples after rain. Eleanor swallowed. He said no place in the world smelled like home except my kitchen when the stove was too hot, and I pretended it was on purpose. A tear slid down her cheek. Then she reached the final lines. For several seconds she did not read them. The room waited. At last, Eleanor spoke, each word fragile but clear. If I do not make it back, don't spend the rest of your life standing at the door for me. Let Noble help you find good people. He knows more than he lets on. And if someone carries you through winter when I cannot, please let that person in. Noble looked from Eleanor to Caleb. The movement was so deliberate that Caleb felt the hair rise along the back of his neck. It was not magic. It was not a sign written in flame. It was only a dog, old enough to remember, loyal enough to obey a love that had outlived its owner. But in that moment the cabin seemed to hold more than 3 living beings. Eleanor lowered the letter into her lap. She looked at Noble, then at Caleb. Noble chose you, she said. Caleb shook his head once. He chose to save you. No, she said softly. He knew where to stop running. That sentence found Caleb unguarded. For years, he had believed himself the last broken piece of a failed promise. A man who lived because another man did not. A man useful in storms, useful with tools, useful in emergencies. But not someone meant to be welcomed into the quiet rooms of ordinary love. Eleanor reached across the small space between them. Her hand was thin, cold at the fingertips, but steady. Caleb hesitated before taking it. When he did, she held on with surprising strength. I lost my son, she said. You lost your brother in all but blood. War took him from me. It also took some part of you and left the rest wandering. Caleb's eyes burned. I don't deserve your kindness. I am not giving it because you deserve it, Eleanor said. I am giving it because Owen loved you enough to trust you with his last words. And because I am very old, Caleb Rourke, and old women have no time to waste pretending pain is wisdom. Despite everything, a rough laugh escaped him. Eleanor's mouth curved faintly. There, she said, still alive. He looked down. She squeezed his hand. If Owen trusted you, I will try to trust you. But you must do something for me. Anything, live, she said. Not just fix engines, not just split wood, not just survive from one winter to the next, live. A man can turn grief into a shrine and spend the rest of his life kneeling before it. Don't do that. My son would hate it. Caleb could not answer. The command was too simple, too impossible. He had rescued people before. He had carried weight, followed orders, completed missions, but no one had ever ordered him to return to his own life. Outside, the wind began to soften. It did not stop all at once. Storms rarely granted such mercy. But the furious pressure against the windows eased. The trees no longer screamed. Snow still fell, but now it drifted rather than attacked. Morning would come pale and difficult. The roads would need clearing. The town would count damage. People would shovel porches, restart cars, check pipes, complain about weather, and make coffee as if the world had not shifted in one cabin at the edge of the pines. Caleb rose and added wood to the fire. You can stay here until the roads are safe, he said. Eleanor folded Owen's letter with trembling care and held it against her heart again. When they are, Caleb continued, I'll take you home. She looked up at him. For the first time since he had pulled her from the snow, her eyes held something beyond shock and grief. Not peace. Not yet. But direction. No, she said gently. Caleb paused. Eleanor stroked Noble's head. The dog leaned into her hand, tired now, finally allowing his body to rest. You will take me home to Owen. Caleb did not understand at first. Then he did. Not to a grave, not to a memory, not to the past. To the little house where Owen's room still waited, where the porch still sagged, where the apple trees had never been planted, where a promise had been left standing in the cold too long. Caleb looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, the storm was loosening its grip on Hearthpine Falls. Inside the cabin, something else had begun. Not forgiveness. That was too large a word for one night. Not healing. That was too clean. It was a beginning, small and stubborn as a match struck in winter. Caleb nodded. "All right, Mrs. Bell." She closed her eyes. "Eleanor," she corrected. He swallowed. "All right, Eleanor." Noble sighed, long and heavy, and rested his head across her feet. The fire burned low and golden. And through the last hours of the storm, 3 souls kept watch together. A mother who had finally heard her son's last words, a dog who had carried a promise through years of snow, and a soldier who had been asked at last to stop merely surviving. By morning the storm had left Hearthpine Falls looking newly made and quietly wounded. Snow rose in soft banks along the roads, piled against fences, wrapped around mailboxes, and buried the lower steps of porches. The sky above northern Michigan had cleared to a pale blue, and sunlight struck the frozen world with a brightness that made every broken branch and bent gutter impossible to hide. Caleb Rourke drove slowly through town with Eleanor Bell in the passenger seat and Noble lying across the back seat like a silent guardian. The old woman held Owen's folded letter inside both hands. She had not put it in her pocket. She had not set it in her bag. She held it the way some people held a prayer. Noble had finally slept for an hour before dawn, but now his amber eyes were open again. The 7-year-old German shepherd's yellow and black coat had dried by the fire, though the fur around his chest still looked rough from the hard night. He lifted his head whenever Eleanor shifted, and each time she whispered, "I'm here, boy," as if the dog needed the same reassurance she did. Caleb did not speak much on the drive. He wore the same fitted green camouflage uniform, clean despite the long night, his broad shoulders steady behind the wheel, his strong, clean-shaven face set in quiet concentration. His silver-touched undercut was neat, but his eyes looked older than they had the day before. There were roads that could be cleared with a plow. There were others a man had to travel inside himself. Eleanor's house stood near the edge of town, where Hearthpine Falls thinned into pine woods and the road curved toward the frozen creek. It was a small white house with peeling paint, dark green shutters, and a porch that leaned slightly to the left, as if it had been listening to too many winters and had grown tired of standing straight. Caleb parked beside the fence. For several seconds, Eleanor did not move. The house waited under its heavy cap of snow. One front window caught the morning light. A little glass ornament shaped like an apple hung there, turning slowly in the draft from inside. "I used to think," Eleanor said quietly, "that if I kept it the same, he would know where to find me." Caleb looked at the porch, the warped rail, the sagging step. "He would have," he said. She turned toward him. Caleb did not explain. He only opened the truck door and came around to help her down. Noble jumped out first. He landed stiffly, shook snow from his paws, then walked to the porch. He climbed the first step and stopped. His front paw pressed the board, and the wood gave a tired crack. Caleb heard it. Noble turned and looked at him. It was not a request. Caleb sighed through his nose. "Of course," Eleanor blinked. "What?" "Your foreman says the porch is unsafe." For the first time that morning, the corner of Eleanor's mouth lifted. He has always been bossy. Caleb went to the bed of the truck and pulled out his toolkit. "I'll just secure the step," he said. "Then I'll get out of your way." Eleanor looked at him with the soft patience of someone old enough to recognize a lie before the person telling it did. "Yes," she said. "Just the step." The step became the railing. The railing became the front door hinge. The hinge became the strip of cold air cutting through the frame. By noon, Caleb had repaired 3 loose boards, tightened the handrail, cleared the porch roof, and sealed a window gap with weather stripping he found in his truck. He worked without fuss. Sleeves rolled slightly, movements exact and controlled. Every nail went in straight. Every board was tested with his boot before he trusted it beneath Eleanor's weight. The house was not neglected. That became clear to him the longer he stayed. The floors were swept. The curtains were clean. The kitchen shelves were arranged neatly, flour tin beside sugar tin, teacups turned handle out. There were no piles of trash, no sour smell, no carelessness. The house was simply old, and so was Eleanor. There was a difference between abandonment and a battle lost 1 inch at a time. Inside, Eleanor made tea with hands that trembled, but still remembered every motion. She moved slowly through the kitchen. small and bent but dignified, placing cups on saucers as if a guest had arrived for Sunday afternoon instead of a former seal with snow in his boots and grief in his pockets. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said from the doorway. "If a man fixes my porch, he gets tea. If he fixes the window too, then he gets the good cup." He glanced at the cup in his hand, a chipped white one with blue flowers. "This is the good cup? It survived Owen." Caleb looked up. Eleanor's eyes warmed with memory. He knocked over everything: lamps, chairs, hymn books. Once he tripped over Noble and apologized to the dog for being in the way. Noble, lying beside the stove, lifted his head as if the apology had been long overdue. Caleb sat at the kitchen table while Eleanor told small stories. Owen afraid of thunder as a boy, hiding under the piano bench with a blanket over his head. Owen feeding Noble scraps beneath the table, and then pretending the dog had developed independent sandwich acquisition skills. Owen promising that someday he would buy Eleanor a new piano for the church room, one that did not sound like a goose with moral questions. Each story added color to a man Caleb had known mostly in danger. He had known Owen brave, hungry, cold, tired, laughing under impossible circumstances. Eleanor had known him barefoot in summer, muddy from the creek, guilty beside an empty pie plate. Together, without meaning to, they were rebuilding him. Piece by piece, a knock came at the back door just after lunch. Martha Quinn entered, carrying a covered dish and a bakery box tied with red string. In daylight, Martha seemed even warmer than the bread she carried. 57, round-faced, sturdy, with flour still caught near one elbow and silver streaks tucked through her brown bun. Her eyes went straight to Eleanor, then to Caleb, then to Noble, who rose with careful dignity. "Well," Martha said, "I heard the storm tried to steal my best customer." Eleanor smiled. "I'm not your best customer. I was talking to Noble." Noble gave one slow wag, accepting his status. Martha set the food on the counter, then crossed to Eleanor and held her face between both hands. Her voice softened. "You scared us. I scared myself a little. That makes two of us." Martha glanced at Caleb. "You're the one who found her?" "Yes, Mom." Martha studied him in the direct way of a woman who had raised children, managed bakers, and argued with delivery men before sunrise. "Then you're eating too." "I'm fine. That was not the question." Eleanor's eyes brightened faintly. "Careful. She wins." "I've noticed that about women in this town," Caleb said. Martha smiled, approving despite herself. Before they could sit, another visitor arrived. Reverend Samuel Pike stepped through the doorway with his hat in both hands. He was 68, tall but slightly stooped, with thinning silver hair combed to one side, a neatly trimmed white beard, and gentle eyes set deep behind wire-framed glasses. He wore a long black wool coat over a clerical shirt, and carried the quiet presence of an old pine tree beside a churchyard, weathered, rooted, and difficult to hurry. "Eleanor," he said softly. She reached for him. He took her hand and bowed over it, not theatrically, but with real affection. "I prayed through half the night." "Only half? The other half I argued with the furnace," Martha snorted. "The Lord tests your patience through plumbing, Reverend. He has been thorough." Even Caleb felt the room ease. Samuel looked at Caleb. "Mr. Rourke, I'm grateful." Caleb nodded once. "Just Caleb. Then I'm grateful, Caleb." The Reverend's gaze moved to the repaired step visible through the window. He saw more than boards. He saw the beginning of a man staying longer than he had planned. Later in the afternoon, Deputy Clara Voss stopped by in uniform, snow clinging to her black boots. She was compact and strong, with dark brown hair tied low beneath her cap, a sharp jaw, and clear gray eyes that had learned to be kind without becoming naive. Her navy winter jacket bore the sheriff's patch, and her hands rested near her belt with the easy readiness of someone who had walked into many homes not knowing what waited inside. "I should have found you before he did," Clara told Eleanor, guilt hiding beneath professional calm. "You had a whole town to keep upright," Eleanor replied. "That doesn't make me feel better." "It wasn't meant to. Just true." Clara looked toward Caleb. "You staying around today?" Caleb opened his mouth to say no. Noble rose from beside the stove and walked to the porch door. He stood there, looking at the damaged frame Caleb had not yet repaired. Clara followed the dog's gaze, then looked back at Caleb. "Smart dog." "He's pushy," Caleb said. "They can be both." Clara's expression turned more serious. She lowered her voice. "Eleanor has refused assistance before. Wellness checks, transport during weather, home repair grants. Said she couldn't leave the house in case Owen came back." Eleanor looked down at her hands. Caleb felt that sentence settle inside him like snow on a roof already carrying too much weight. The house was not only shelter. It had been a lighthouse. No wonder she had kept the lamp burning. News traveled in Hearthpine Falls faster than road salt. By evening, several neighbors had heard that Caleb Rourke was repairing Eleanor Bell's house. Some were relieved. Some were curious. A few were ashamed they had not done it first, and Frank Halloway, behind the counter of his antique shop, was displeased. He came near sunset, not all the way to the porch, only to the gate. His dark coat was buttoned too tight over his heavy frame, and his thinning gray hair lay damp from snow. His square face had the pinched look of a man who disliked finding charity where he had hoped to find opportunity. "Mrs. Bell," he called, "I see you've got help now." Eleanor sat wrapped in a blanket near the front window while Caleb replaced a loose hinge. Martha had left. Samuel had gone to check the church furnace. Clara had returned to patrol the roads. Caleb stepped onto the porch. Frank's eyes measured him, then the tools, then the repaired railing. "Generous of you," Frank said. Caleb said nothing. Frank smiled without warmth. "Just hope everyone understands what's what. Elderly woman, property near the woods, stranger suddenly fixing the place. People talk." Eleanor's face paled. Caleb's hand stayed relaxed at his sides. That was the only sign that anger had arrived. "I'm not a stranger," he said. Frank's eyes narrowed. "No?" Noble appeared beside Caleb in the doorway. He did not growl. He only stood there. Frank took half a step back before pretending he had meant to shift his weight. Eleanor spoke from inside, voice thin but clear. "Good evening, Frank." The dismissal was gentle and absolute. Frank's mouth tightened, evening. He left tracks in the snow that looked deeper than necessary. After he was gone, Caleb returned to his tools, but the pleasure had gone out of the work. He could feel the shape of the rumor before it had fully formed. A lonely old woman, a man with a past, a house with value. It was the kind of ugliness that entered a room wearing clean shoes. By night he had packed his tool bag. Eleanor watched from the kitchen table. Going home? That was the plan. The plan before or after Frank? Caleb paused. She said it kindly, which made it harder to avoid. "I don't want people talking about you. People already talk about me." "Not like that." "Caleb," she said, "if gossip could kill, I would have been buried years ago." He looked toward the door. "I can come by tomorrow early," he said. "Finish the frame. Check the stovepipe. You can." He lifted the tool bag. Before he reached the door, Noble disappeared down the hall. A moment later, the German shepherd returned, carrying Owen's old harmonica gently in his mouth. Caleb froze. Noble crossed the room, set the harmonica directly in front of Caleb's boots, then lowered himself across the doorway with a heavy sigh. Yellow and black body stretched like a living barricade. Caleb stared down at him. "You know this is unfair." Noble did not blink. Eleanor looked from the dog to the harmonica, then pressed one hand to her mouth. Grief and humor met on her face, and for one bright, painful second she looked almost young. "Noble," she said, "has never been polite when he knows he is right." Caleb stood there, tool bag in hand, caught between a door and a dog, who had apparently taken command of his conscience. Finally, he set the bag down. "One night," he said. Noble thumped his tail once against the floor. "Don't celebrate." The dog closed his eyes. Caleb stayed one night, then another. The next morning he drove Eleanor to see Dr. Helen Armitage at the small clinic near the pharmacy. Helen was 61, short and slim, with soft gray hair cut to her chin and thoughtful brown eyes behind narrow glasses. She wore a white medical coat over a pale gray turtleneck, and carried herself with the calm sorrow of someone who had spent decades telling people hard truths as gently as possible. She checked Eleanor's lungs, pulse, blood pressure, and hands. Then she looked at Caleb, then at Noble sitting beside Eleanor's chair, then back at Eleanor. "No more walks in heavy snow," Helen said. Eleanor opened her mouth. "No," Helen added. That was not a suggestion. Caleb liked her immediately. Eleanor sighed. "I have things to do. You have things to do alive." Noble placed one paw on Eleanor's shoe. "Traitor," her expression said. The doctor's verdict was clear. Eleanor's heart was tired. Her lungs had taken strain from the cold. She could still live with care, warmth, rest, and stubbornness used in smaller doses. On the drive home, Eleanor looked out at the town. "I don't need to search anymore," she said. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "But I would like to go through town once more, not with the sign, not asking, just to say thank you. To the bakery, the church, the station. Even the post office, though they never found anything. We'll do it on a clear day. We?" He glanced at her. She did not smile, but Noble's head appeared between the seats as if listening for the answer. "Yes," Caleb said. "We." Days began to gather. Caleb repaired the porch properly. He sealed the windows, checked the stove, cleared snow from the roof edge, and reinforced the back steps. Each morning he told himself he was only finishing what he had started. Each evening Eleanor set an extra bowl at the table. Not a fancy meal, soup, bread, sometimes eggs. Once Martha's apple cake, which Noble regarded with tragic longing and received none of. Caleb began checking the stove before leaving for his own cabin. Then he began staying until the fire settled. Then he found himself bringing tools without being asked. Eleanor never called him son. Caleb never called her mother. But something unnamed sat with them at supper, passing the salt and warming its hands. One late afternoon, Caleb finally repaired the porch light. The fixture had hung crooked above the door, its glass cloudy, its wiring brittle. He cleaned it, rewired it, replaced the cracked pane, and fitted a new bulb. Eleanor stood inside the doorway wrapped in her blue scarf. Noble sat on the porch between them, watching as if supervising the last piece of an ancient ritual. Caleb flipped the switch. Golden light poured over the porch, over the repaired boards, over the snowbank near the steps. It touched Eleanor's face and made the tears there shine before she could hide them. "Owen promised he would fix that," she said. Caleb looked at the lamp, then at the small old house that had waited through so many winters. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Then maybe today he borrowed my hands." Eleanor turned away, but not before Caleb saw her mouth tremble. Noble leaned against Caleb's leg. The porch light glowed into the blue winter evening, steady and warm. Not bright enough to change the whole world, but enough to tell anyone lost in the snow that one house still knew how to welcome them home. Winter did not leave Hearthpine Falls all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like an old hand unclenching, after holding sorrow too long. The mornings remained white and bitter. Icicles still hung from the bakery roof. The road to the frozen harbor still groaned beneath packed snow. But there were hours now, brief and bright, when sunlight rested on the town with something almost like mercy. Eleanor Bell no longer walked Main Street every day. Dr. Helen Armitage's warning had settled over the house like another quilt. Necessary, warm, and impossible to ignore. Eleanor grumbled about it at first, not with anger, but with the wounded pride of someone who had survived too long by refusing help. Yet her breath came shorter after even small efforts, and her hand sometimes trembled around a teacup when she thought no one was watching. Caleb Rourke watched anyway. He had spent his life noticing what people tried to hide. On clear days, he drove her through town in his dark blue pickup. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat with her old blue scarf tucked neatly at her throat, her white hair pinned low, her thin hands folded over her purse. Noble sat in the back seat, his yellow and black head resting between the front seats like an old captain overseeing a ship. The German shepherd had grown steadier since the storm, but his eyes never lost their watchfulness. They did not carry the sign anymore. That was the first thing people noticed. At Quinn's Hearth Bakery, Martha Quinn came around the counter before Eleanor had fully stepped inside. Martha wore her white apron over a cream dress, flower on one sleeve, and worry plainly written across her round, kind face. She opened her arms, then stopped herself, as if afraid Eleanor might break. Eleanor solved the problem by stepping into the hug. "I came to thank you," Eleanor said. Martha's eyes filled at once. "For what?" "For not looking away." Martha held her tighter. "Oh, Eleanor." Noble sat near the bakery case, gazing with grave longing at a tray of apple turnovers. Martha glanced down at him through her tears. "And you," she said, pointing at the dog. "You kept her bossed around when the rest of us failed." Noble's tail moved once. Caleb stood near the door, hands folded in front of him, uncomfortable with tenderness and unwilling to leave it. He had been in rooms full of grief before, but this was different. This grief had cinnamon in it, warm bread, women holding each other, a dog pretending not to beg. At the post office, the clerk who had so often searched records with no result lowered his eyes when Eleanor thanked him for trying. At the old train station, she stood on the platform only a few minutes, one hand on Caleb's arm, the other resting on Noble's head. She did not ask the empty tracks any more questions. At the church, Reverend Samuel Pike met them beneath the wooden archway. Samuel was 68, tall and slightly stooped, with thinning silver hair, a neatly kept white beard, and eyes gentle enough to make confession feel less frightening. His long black coat brushed the snow as he walked. He took Eleanor's hand and held it between both of his. "You came back without the sign," he said. "I finally received my answer." His face softened with the ache of a man who had prayed for answers and learned they did not always arrive wearing kindness. "Then we will make room for what comes after," he said. Eleanor looked toward the sanctuary where the old piano waited. "I hope so." Later that week, while Caleb repaired a drafty panel in the attic, he found the tin box. It was tucked behind a stack of old hymn books and a cracked lampshade, wrapped in a faded tablecloth and tied with ribbon that had once been yellow. The tin itself was blue, decorated with painted apples, dented at one corner, and heavier than Caleb expected. He carried it downstairs. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table shelling peas into a bowl, though Caleb suspected she had taken the peas out mainly to feel useful. Noble lay beneath the table, his body positioned so that one paw touched her slipper. Caleb placed the box before her. "I found this upstairs." Eleanor looked at it and became very still. "That old thing," she said softly. "Do you want me to put it back?" "No." She set the peas aside. "No, I suppose it is tired of hiding." Inside the box were papers bundled with twine, a savings book, the deed to the house, old photographs, several letters from Owen, and a folded sheet written in Eleanor's careful hand. Caleb saw the title at the top, Last Will and Testament. He stepped back at once. "That's none of my business." Eleanor looked up, and the old schoolteacher in her returned fully. "Sit down, Caleb Rourke." He sat, not because she was strong enough to make him, because somehow she was. She touched the savings book. This was for Owen. Caleb said nothing. "I saved a little from teaching music, a little from my husband's pension before he passed, a little from sewing work after that. Owen sent money when he could, though I told him not to. I kept it, because he promised we would fix the house when he came home." Her fingers moved over the paper as if smoothing a child's hair. He wanted apple trees out back, a piano room for lessons, a place where children who had no money could learn music anyway. Caleb's throat tightened. "You should use it for yourself." "I did use it for myself," she said. He frowned. It kept me believing he had somewhere to return. That silenced him. Eleanor unfolded the draft will. "I wrote this years ago. I did not know how to finish it. I thought perhaps if I wrote Owen's name enough times, the Lord might notice the paperwork and send him home to sign it." The attempt at humor was thin but real. Caleb leaned forward. "Eleanor, I can't take this. I haven't offered it to you." His brow furrowed. She looked at him with eyes dimmed by age but sharpened by purpose. "I am offering you responsibility." The word landed heavier than money ever could. "There are old people in this town who are disappearing," Eleanor said. "Not dying, not yet, disappearing, behind curtains, behind pride, behind children who moved south and call twice a year, behind furnaces that cough all night, behind pill bottles they stretch because fixed incomes do not stretch back." Caleb listened. "I carried a sign," she continued. "That made people see me, even if they were annoyed by it. But many do not carry signs. They simply grow quiet until the world mistakes them for furniture." Noble lifted his head. Eleanor looked down at him. "Isn't that right?" The dog rose suddenly. At first Caleb thought he had heard a car outside. But Noble did not go to the door. He walked to the front window, stood on the rug beneath the porch light, and stared across the road at the small gray house opposite Eleanor's. The house belonged to Mr. Alden Price, an 87-year-old retired mail carrier who rarely came outside in winter. Its curtains were drawn. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. Noble gave one short bark. Eleanor's face changed. "Alden." Caleb was on his feet. He crossed the road with Noble at his side and knocked hard. No answer. He tried the door. Unlocked. Inside, the house was cold enough to show breath. Alden Price sat in a chair near the stove, wrapped in a coat, confused and shivering but conscious. His furnace had failed some time before dawn, and he had been too dizzy to reach the phone. Alden was a thin old man with brown skin weathered by decades of walking mail routes in every season. His white hair stood in soft wisps around his head, and his hands shook from cold rather than fear. Even half frozen, he apologized for being a bother. Caleb called Deputy Clara Voss and Dr. Helen. Clara arrived first, boots loud on the porch, her Navy sheriff's jacket dusted with snow, her sharp gray eyes taking in the room at once. Helen followed soon after with a medical bag, her short gray hair tucked beneath a knit hat, her calm voice steadying everyone. Alden was taken to the clinic to warm up and be checked. No drama, no sirens screaming through the town. Just one old man found before winter could finish what loneliness had started. Back at Eleanor's kitchen table, Caleb looked at Noble. The dog sat calmly beside Eleanor, as if he had only done the obvious thing. Eleanor's eyes shone. "You see," she said, "he knows who needs finding." Caleb looked across the road at Alden's dark house. For the first time, Eleanor's idea no longer sounded like charity. It sounded like a mission. The next morning, Caleb called Grace Holloway. Grace was 46, a community lawyer with dark blonde hair cut neatly to her shoulders, a slim frame, and a face that balanced intelligence with compassion. Her navy wool coat was buttoned perfectly, and she carried a brown leather briefcase polished from years of use. Grace had a reputation in Hearthpine Falls for reading contracts the way other people read weather. carefully, suspiciously, and with respect for what could harm the unprepared. She sat with Eleanor in the living room while Caleb remained near the doorway. Grace asked questions gently but thoroughly. Did Eleanor understand the value of her property? Did she understand what a trust was? Was anyone pressuring her? Did she want Caleb to inherit personally? Eleanor answered each one clearly. No, he is not pressuring me. No, I do not want him to pocket it and buy a yacht. Caleb blinked. A yacht? Eleanor gave him a look. You seem like a man with secret yacht opinions. Grace smiled despite herself. Eleanor continued. I want a fund for old people no one sees. Meals, repairs, rides to doctors, someone to knock after storms, someone to notice when a porch light goes dark. Grace's expression shifted from professional care to something deeper. The Porch Light Fund, she said. Eleanor looked at Caleb. He nodded slowly. The Porch Light Fund, he repeated. Reverend Samuel came that afternoon to serve as community witness. Dr. Helen confirmed Eleanor's clarity and health condition. Grace drafted the trust so that the house and savings would not become Caleb's personal property. Caleb would coordinate repairs and visits. Grace would oversee legal matters. Reverend Samuel would gather volunteers through the church. Dr. Helen and Clara would help identify urgent needs. It was clean. It was fair. It was Eleanor's will, not Caleb's gain. Of course, Frank Halloway hated it. The news reached him before evening, and by nightfall whispers were already circling the town. Frank claimed Caleb had manipulated an old woman. He suggested the fund was a noble-sounding trick. He told anyone who stood long enough near his antique counter that property near the woods was valuable and that lonely people were easily influenced. 2 nights later, Noble woke Caleb with a low growl. Caleb had been asleep in the chair near Eleanor's stove, boots still on, when the dog rose and moved to the front door. His body was rigid, but controlled. Outside, beyond the fence, a figure stood near the window. Caleb stepped onto the porch. Frank Halloway froze under the porch light. He was bundled in his dark coat and black scarf, square face flushed with cold and embarrassment. Snow clung to his shoes. In one hand, he held a small flashlight pointed toward the ground. Caleb did not raise his voice. All documents are with Grace Holloway, he said. Reverend Pike witnessed. Dr. Armitage witnessed. Deputy Voss has been informed. Frank's mouth opened, then closed. From inside the house, Eleanor's voice came frail but clear. Good night, Frank. Noble stood beside Caleb, silent as judgment. Frank turned and left without a word. By Sunday, the town had changed its tone. Not completely. Towns rarely repented all at once. But Martha began collecting names of elderly customers who needed winter checks. Clara quietly added addresses to a list. Reverend Samuel announced a meeting after service for anyone willing to help. Eleanor asked Caleb to take her to the church that afternoon. The sanctuary smelled of old wood, candle wax, and pine boughs. Sunlight came through the frosted windows in pale gold stripes. Caleb helped Eleanor to the piano bench. Her fingers, thin and trembling, rested on the yellowed keys. Noble lay beside the bench. Caleb stood behind her. Eleanor played a hymn slowly, missing notes, finding them again, letting the music limp and shine at the same time. It was not beautiful in the polished way. It was beautiful in the truthful way. When the last note faded, she kept her hands on the keys. Owen did not come home the way I begged God to send him, she said. Caleb looked down. But perhaps God was not ignoring me. Perhaps he sent you on a road so long and crooked that even you did not know where you were going until you reached my door. Caleb's eyes burned. Eleanor reached down and laid her hand on Noble's head. When I am not here, she said, Noble will know who needs to be found next. Caleb did not understand all of it. Not yet. But Noble lifted his amber eyes to him, calm and certain, as if the old dog had already accepted a mission no human had fully named. Eleanor Bell passed away on a morning when the snow finally stopped falling. It was not a dramatic morning. No wind shook the windows. No storm pressed its hands against the little white house at the edge of Hearthpine Falls. The sky was pale and quiet, with a faint line of gold opening behind the pines, as if the world had lowered its voice out of respect. Caleb Rourke found her in the chair beside the front window. She had chosen that chair the night before because she said she wanted to see the porch light one more time before sleep. Her faded blue scarf rested across her shoulders. Owen's letter lay folded on the small table beside her teacup. One thin hand rested on the arm of the chair, palm open, relaxed at last. Noble was beside her. The 7-year-old German shepherd lay with his yellow and black body curled close to her feet, his head lifted when Caleb entered the room. He did not bark. He did not whine. He only looked at Caleb with those amber eyes, deep and steady, as if he had been waiting for the living to understand what the faithful already knew. Caleb stopped in the doorway. For a moment, he was not a former Navy SEAL, not a man of tools and discipline, not the one who had carried her through a storm. He was only a son standing too late in a quiet room. The night before, Eleanor had spoken of a dream. She had been wrapped in her quilt, her face thinner than it had been even a week earlier, but her eyes strangely bright. Caleb sat near the stove, mending the handle of an old drawer because he had run out of important things to repair and had begun fixing anything that might give his hands a reason to keep moving. "I saw him," Eleanor had said. Caleb looked up. "Owen?" he asked. She nodded. He was standing under apple trees, not old trees, young ones, spring leaves everywhere. He had that harmonica in his hand and the grin he wore when he knew he was in trouble. Noble had lifted his head from the rug. "He told me not to walk too slow," Eleanor whispered, and then she laughed softly. "Imagine that, my own son rushing me in heaven." Caleb had wanted to answer, but grief had filled his mouth. Now morning had come and Eleanor had gone where no road in Hearthpine Falls could follow. Caleb walked to her chair and knelt. Noble placed his muzzle gently on Eleanor's hand. He kept it there for a long time. Then, with great care, he turned his head and touched Caleb's wrist. It was not a command. It was a passing of the leash no one could see. Caleb took Eleanor's hand. It was cool, light, peaceful. He bowed his head over it. "Goodbye, Ma," he whispered. The word broke him quietly. Eleanor had not replaced his mother. She had done something stranger and holier. In the last winter of her life, she had given Caleb the chance to be someone's son again. Not by blood, not by law, by need, by trust, by a porch light left burning for a man who had forgotten he was allowed to come in. The funeral was held 3 days later at the old wooden church. Caleb had expected a small service. Eleanor had been lonely for so long that he assumed loneliness would follow her even there. But by 10 in the morning, people were standing in the aisles. Martha Quinn arrived with 2 apple pies and a face red from crying. She wore a dark green dress beneath her winter coat, her brown and silver hair pinned neatly, flour still somehow dusting one sleeve, as if grief had not excused her from baking. Deputy Clara Voss stood near the back in her Navy winter uniform, strong-jawed and solemn, her dark ponytail tucked beneath her cap. Dr. Helen Armitage placed a small white bouquet near the front, her gray bob framing a face lined by years of delivering hard news with gentle hands. Grace Holloway sat with a folder on her lap, elegant and composed in her navy coat, though her eyes shone when she looked toward Eleanor's simple wooden casket. Reverend Samuel Pike stood before the altar in his black coat and clerical collar, his white beard neatly trimmed, his voice calm in the way old bells were calm, able to ring through sorrow without breaking it. Even Frank Halloway came. He stood outside the church doors for nearly 10 minutes before entering. His square face looked smaller somehow, his dark scarf hanging loose, his thinning gray hair damp from melting snow. He slipped into the last pew and kept his eyes down. No one asked him to leave. That was the first mercy the day offered him. Noble lay at Caleb's feet through the service. He did not move when hymns were sung. He did not lift his head when people wept. But when Reverend Samuel spoke Eleanor's name, the dog gave one soft breath, almost a sigh, and Caleb felt it more than heard it. When it was time, Caleb stood. The church seemed too full of faces. He had spoken before men in dangerous places. He had given orders. He had made calls that mattered. Yet standing before a small northern town to speak about an old woman felt harder than any of it. He placed both hands on the edge of the lectern. Eleanor Bell was not just an old woman with a sign, he said. The room went still. She was a mother who refused to let love die, simply because the world stopped answering her questions. She walked this town for years looking for her son. Some of you helped her. Some of you looked away. Most of us at one time or another have done both. No one moved. Caleb looked down at Noble. She had a dog who understood loyalty better than most people understand language. Noble stayed with her when hope became thin. He guarded her door. He led her through snow. And one night, when she could not walk any farther, he made sure someone stopped. His voice roughened. I knew her son. Owen Bell was my friend. He loved this town. He loved his mother. He loved this stubborn dog. In his last letter, he asked her to let good people in if he could not come home. Caleb looked at the congregation. She did, and because she did, I found my way in too. He did not speak long after that. He did not need to. After the service, Grace Holloway stood in the fellowship hall while people gathered with paper cups of coffee and plates of Martha's pie. She explained Eleanor's wishes clearly. The house, savings, and personal effects would not become Caleb's private inheritance. They would form the beginning of the Porchlight Fund, a trust dedicated to helping elderly residents in Hearth Pine Falls and nearby communities. Repairs, warm meals, rides to medical appointments, storm checks, companionship. Someone to knock when a light did not come on. Caleb would coordinate the work. Grace would oversee the legal matters. Reverend Samuel would gather volunteers. Dr. Helen would help identify medical needs. Clara would assist with safety checks after storms. Martha, already wiping her eyes with one hand and making lists with the other, declared that the bakery could provide soup twice a week and bread whenever the ovens were running. "The ovens are always running," Clara said. Martha pointed at her. "Exactly." For the first time since the funeral began, a small laugh moved through the room. It did not erase grief. It gave grief somewhere to sit. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's house changed. Caleb repaired the roof properly when the weather allowed. He turned the front room into a place where people could receive meals, sit by the stove, and talk without feeling like they had come for charity. The room where Owen's bed once stood became a small music room. Reverend Samuel found an old upright piano from a church basement 2 towns over. It arrived out of tune, scratched, and stubborn, which Martha said made it a perfect match for the committee. The shed behind the house became a storage room for blankets, space heaters, canned food, and toolboxes. Clara pinned a map of the county to the wall and marked houses where older residents lived alone. Dr. Helen added notes carefully, respecting privacy, but refusing to let pride become a death sentence. Grace built the paperwork so cleanly that even Frank Halloway, when he came one afternoon to drop off an old lamp that might be useful, could find nothing to criticize. He did not apologize, not with words. He placed the lamp on the porch, cleared his throat, and said, "It works." Caleb nodded. "Thank you." Frank looked toward Noble, who sat in the doorway watching him. "Dog still hates me?" "Noble has high standards," Frank grunted. "Fair." Then he left. Spring came slowly. Snow retreated from the fence line. Water ran in silver threads along the road. The pines shook off their white burdens. The air smelled of mud, thawing earth, and something green waiting beneath everything dead. The Porchlight Fund began with small acts. A repaired furnace, a ride to Dr. Helen's clinic, a warm meal delivered to a widow named Mrs. Lacey Ward, an 82-year-old woman with soft white curls, dark eyes, and hands that trembled whenever she tried to button her cardigan. She had lost her husband in November and had not eaten with another person since Christmas. Noble sat beside her chair during the meal. At first, Mrs. Ward apologized for crying. Then Noble placed his head on her knee. She stopped apologizing. The rehook came on a bright Tuesday afternoon when Caleb and Clara were delivering blankets to the far end of Maple Road. Noble suddenly stopped at the gate of a small blue house with peeling trim. It was not on Clara's urgent list. Caleb tugged the leash gently. "Come on, boy." Noble did not move. He stared at the house, ears forward, body still. Then he gave one low bark and sat down in the mud beside the gate, as if planting himself there. Clara looked at Caleb. "You know," she said, "I'm starting to dislike when he does that." Caleb opened the gate. Inside they found Mr. Leonard Hayes, a retired school custodian in his late 70s, lying on the kitchen floor after a minor fall. Leonard was a tall, bony man with deep brown skin, a white mustache, and proud eyes that filled with embarrassment before relief. He had been there for hours, unable to reach the phone, angry at himself for needing help. Noble walked straight to him and lay down close enough for Leonard's hand to rest on his back. The old man whispered, "Good dog." Caleb knelt beside him and answered, "The best." No one in Hearth Pine Falls called it magic, not officially. But after that, people listened when Noble stopped. By late spring, Caleb planted apple trees behind Eleanor's house. He chose young trees with strong roots. Reverend Samuel blessed them without making a ceremony too grand. Martha brought lemonade. Clara dug 2 holes and complained that Caleb's military standards for tree alignment were emotionally excessive. Dr. Helen sat on a folding chair and supervised with medical authority. Grace labeled each sapling in careful handwriting. The first tree bore Eleanor's name, the second bore Owen's. At the base of the third, Caleb buried the braided cord from Owen's pouch, not as a relic, not as a wound. As a seed of memory beneath living soil, he pressed the dirt down with both hands. Noble sat beside him, quiet in the warm air. "You think she'd approve?" Caleb asked. Noble looked toward the porch. The porch light was already on, though the sun had not yet gone down. A few days later, a car stopped at the gate. Deputy Clara stepped out first. Then she helped an elderly woman from the passenger seat. The woman was small and stooped, wrapped in a gray coat too large for her narrow shoulders. Her name was Ruth Emery. She was 79, newly widowed, with silver hair pinned messily at the back of her head and eyes swollen from crying. Shame seemed to weigh more heavily on her than grief. "I don't want to be trouble," Ruth said. Caleb came down the porch steps. Behind him the house glowed with warm light. Voices drifted from inside. Martha laughing in the kitchen. Children testing piano keys, Reverend Samuel greeting someone by name. "You're not trouble," Caleb said. Ruth looked at the doorway, uncertain. Noble went first. He approached slowly, his yellow and black coat shining in the mild spring light. He lowered his head and placed it gently beneath Ruth's trembling hand. The old woman looked down at him. Something in her face broke open. Caleb held the door wide. "Come in," he said. "It's warm here." Ruth stepped over the threshold. Caleb watched Noble guide her inside, and in that moment he understood that Eleanor had not left Hearthpine Falls. Not completely. She was in Martha's bread, in Clara's list, in Helen's careful checkups, in Samuel's prayers, in Grace's files, in the piano notes. Children played badly and bravely in Owen's old room. And she was in Noble. In every step he took toward someone the world had nearly missed. The porch light burned steadily into the evening. Not bright enough to blind anyone, just bright enough to say what Eleanor had spent her final winter teaching them all. No one should grow old unseen. Sometimes God does not answer a prayer by returning what was lost. Sometimes he sends someone else to carry the love forward. A mother who lost her son gave a soldier back his heart. A dog who could not speak showed a town where to look. And from one winter night that nearly ended in silence, a light was lit for every soul still waiting to be found. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder in the sky or a light so bright that everyone can see it. Sometimes a miracle comes quietly. It comes as an old woman still holding on to love when the world tells her to let go. It comes as a loyal dog refusing to leave the side of someone who has been forgotten. It comes as a wounded soldier stopping his truck in the snow, not knowing that the life he is about to save will also save something inside him. Eleanor spent years looking for her son, but in the end her love became a light for many more people. Caleb thought he was only rescuing an old woman from a storm, but God was leading him toward a new purpose. And Noble, without speaking a single word, reminded everyone that sometimes the purest hearts can see pain before humans do. This story teaches us that no one should grow old unseen, unheard, or unloved. In our daily lives, there may be someone near us who is waiting for a phone call, a visit, a warm meal, or simply a kind voice at the door. We may never know how much one small act of kindness can mean to a lonely heart. God often works through ordinary people, through a neighbor who checks in, through a stranger who stops, through a dog who refuses to walk away, through a simple porch light left burning for someone who needs to find their way home. So today, let this story remind us to look closer, love deeper, and never ignore the quiet suffering around us. A small kindness from your hand may become the miracle someone else has been praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Or share a story of someone whose kindness changed your life. And if you want to hear more stories of loyalty, healing, faith, and quiet miracles, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your steps, and place light in every corner of your life that needs warmth, peace, and hope.